Hello, everybody, and welcome to the presentation of our paper, German AI Startups and AI Ethics, using a social practice lens for assessing and implementing socio-technical innovation. My name is Dr. Mona Sloane. I am a sociologist who studies the intersection of technology and society, and I'm based at New York University and the Tübingen AI Center at the University of Tübingen in Germany. I'm the principal investigator of the project, the operationalization of AI ethics in German AI startups. And I'm here today with my researcher and co-owner, Janina Zakrzewski.
Hello, my name is Janina Zakrzewski, and I'm an STS scholar and researcher at the Tübingen AI Center.
The paper we are presenting today builds on almost 3 years of qualitative research on ethics and AI in German startups. This research is focused on understanding the plurality of meanings of ethics among German AI startups, the social assumptions and cultural processes that underpin ethics in these organizations, and the principles, processes, and practices that materialize AI ethics in German AI startups. This study is addressing the issue that we know relatively little about how actors within startups, especially AI startups, understand ethics and socially organize to operationalize ethical concerns.
This is quite astounding given the significance of tech startups as conduits for the cultural production of innovation and progress, especially in the US and European context. The startup AI economy, at least until very recently, had a significant share in the political economy of technology, with $29.5 billion of funding poured into AI startups in 2021 worldwide.
Our research works to address a larger split in the field of AI ethics. There is a rapidly growing body of work that focuses on technical innovation via computational interpretations of ethical concerns, normative frameworks, and socio-technical innovation, which is actually outpacing the production of empirical research on the professional practices of AI development. This split intensifies the risk of a disconnect between scholarly research, innovation, and application in the fairness, accountability, and transparency space. And it materializes quite acutely as mounting pressures to identify and mitigate the potential of harms of AI systems have created an urgent need to rapidly assess and implement AI socio-technical innovation focused on fairness, accountability, and transparency. With this paper, we address this need. Concretely, we are doing 3 things. First, we introduce a social practice approach for understanding ethical AI. Second, we present our empirical findings on the operationalization of AI ethics in German startups, trying to underline that AI ethics and social practices must be understood in their specific cultural and historical contexts. And third, we suggest a way for AI researchers, practitioners, and regulators to systematically analyze existing cultural understandings, histories, and social practices of ethical AI to define appropriate strategies for effectively implementing socio-technical innovations.
Our conceptual frame and our first contribution is understanding AI ethics and as a social practice. We are not so much interested in individualized processes and responsibilities, but want to center the question of how meaning is ascribed to ethics in relation to the wider professional practice of AI design, and how this meaning stabilizes. Within that, we are looking to make space for the cultural specificity of how this dynamic unfolds, as well as its material dimensions. We are less concerned with individualized social processes. Therefore, we engage with the analytically potent notion of social practice theory, a framework that decenters the individual and focuses on a practice as a unit of inquiry. Practices have different elements, competences, materials, and meanings that stabilize a practice as a whole when they link up in repeated behaviors. So, for example, going to the gym or cooking at home. The social practice theory approach allows us to understand what the elements of AI ethics practices are and how these elements connect and stabilize concretely, especially vis-a-vis culturally specificity and historical context.
Our second contribution is the concept of the anatomy of AI ethics. The skeleton of AI ethics is comprised of 5 connected and mutually constitutive AI ethics elements that broadly map onto the characteristics of the social practice elements of competencies, meanings, and materials, but that are more nuanced. And those are principles, needs, narratives, ethics, materials, and cultural genealogy. Principles are frameworks that directly affect collective behavior, particularly within an organization. Examples are co-determination, responsibility, or research. The other elements, needs, narratives, ethics, materials, and cultural genealogy, are articulated in reference to principles. Needs are business needs that are served through various interpretations of AI ethics. These needs are from a very specific social, political, and commercial context, such as German data protection regulation. Narratives are concrete stories that inform the organizational and social logics that underpin the principles and their enactment. For example, the driving narrative of the principle responsibility was, if everybody takes seriously their responsibility to articulate their personal ethical concerns, then the company as a whole will be more ethical. Ethics materials are concrete objects, processes, roles, tools, or infrastructures that focus on AI ethics. For example, Slack channels dedicated to AI ethics or internal working groups. And cultural genealogies are the culturally specific and distinct histories and genealogies of ethical AI as a practice. Together, these elements link up to stabilize AI ethics. Now, whilst these 5 elements scaffold AI ethics, they are brought to life in any specific context by the soft tissue of this anatomy, which is the way in which principles, needs, narratives, and ethics materials and cultural genealogy are enacted in an interconnected way. In other words, the skeleton is the what of AI ethics in German startups, and the soft tissue is the how. Let us illustrate this dynamic by discussing the enactment of the principle Mitbestimmung, or co-determination. Our research participants understood ethical AI to be deeply linked to employees' ability to participate in corporate decision-making. The needs that Mitbestimmung served were threefold. They derived from the necessity of continually establishing a shared set of values and a shared quote-unquote moral compass. This was connected to the need of establishing transparency about underlying rationales for decision-making across the company. A very distinct need that was served through Mitbestimmung was the need for talent attraction, alternative compensation, and retention. The narratives that underpinned Mitbestimmung, amongst others, were our employees need to have a voice in some key company decisions, for example, client acquisition, to collectively define a shared set of value that will keep the company ethical at large. Or in order to attract and retain the young talent that we can't afford as a startup, we have to offer ways to be actively involved in ethical decision-making in the company because this is a demand with this particular demographic. Or to keep up morale in our teams, we need to create transparency about ethical decision-making in the company. The ethics materials that substantiated Mitbestimmung were, for example, formalized co-determination processes focused on ethics, such as a platform for employee voting on client selection, or routines for taking temperatures for employees in all-hands meeting to understand how they, quote, feel about the direction of the company, specifically with regards to ethical concerns on all projects and clients. Or, for example, regular social gatherings, Stammtisch in German, to discuss company matters, particularly as they pertain to ethical issues, for example, social or especially environmental concerns. The cultural genealogy of Mitbestimmung connects the cultural history to the cultural history of the Betriebsrat, the Workers' Council, which historically has had significant influence in decision-making in German corporate organizations, but also to professional co-determination in general that can be traced back to the medieval guild system, and that plays a role in how the collective bargaining power of workers is leveraged via strong unions on the federal level in Germany to this day. The important part is that even though tech workers in German AI startups are not unionized, the threat of the cultural specific continuity of Mitbestimmung shapes the professional practice, not as industrial action, but as AI ethics.
Our third contribution is a matrix that researchers and practitioners can use themselves to create their own internal anatomy of AI ethics to capture continuities rather than disruptions and breakages in the professional practice when they wish to integrate socio-technical innovation. This can facilitate the location of cultural and organizational connection points to technical approaches. The first set of questions allows them to map the anatomy of existing AI ethic practices within their organization. The second set of questions allows them to map and assess existing technical and socio-technical innovations as it is relevant to both the regulatory requirements and their own organizational practices. It prompts them to spell out the type and functionality of any given technical and/or socio-technical innovation, for example, counterfactual explanations, as well as its aims. So, for example, in terms of behavioral change, such as through increasing AI literacy among users who get enrolled into AI systems, or change in policy, such as through improved pathways to recourse. It also prompts them to spell out the connection to the principles, needs, narratives, ethics materials, and cultural genealogy previously identified by asking how any given technical and/or socio-technical innovation fits a principle, addresses an existing need, can be embedded into an existing narrative, can materialize as a part of existing ethics materials, and connects to the cultural genealogy.
We see three main streams of future work being prompted by our research. First, increasing the production of qualitative empirical research on the professional practices of ethics and AI development across different cultural contexts, and specifically non-Western contexts, as well as domains of application. We anticipate that impactful innovation in AI fairness, accountability, and transparency will have to be context, culture, and domain specific. Second, refining the methodology and further detailing and strengthening the conceptual framework of social practice theory, especially vis-a-vis notions of politicality, power, intersectionality, and justice. And third, based on the two catalogs of questions, develop and test a usable framework for practical implementation. We hope that this agenda will help close the gap between technical, normative, and socio-technical innovation on fairness, accountability, and transparency, and qualitative research on AI design practices and the impact of AI on social life. Thank you so much for listening, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us.